is we actually sit and talk about some of the hot topics and some of the other things that go on and get different viewpoints. So I'll throw the first one, and if anyone else pops up with one, we'll debate it. And y'all guys get different views. And also, if y'all got questions, raise your hands. All right, so TikTok is still changing and affecting our culture majorly. There's been a large debate over the past 2 years about, well, that's close practice. Well, that's close practice. From reading tarot to lighting a damn candle is apparently close practice. I think it's hurting our packs. What are y'all's thoughts?
Do you want to take it one at a time? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe so.
I was like, I mean, everybody in the world in existence comes from multiple different cultural backgrounds. And who's to say, just based on someone's physical appearance, where that background comes from? Because I come from Scotland originally. I was born in the UK. I have a lot of Celtic background in my history. But also my mother's family is from India as well. And so whenever I bring up like Indian practices and things like that I was raised around, and people are calling close practices at me, and it's like, my family lived there from 1400 and something until like 1950 something. So my whole family on my mom's side practiced that. So that was what I was raised in, and that's what I understand, and that's what I know. Like, you know, I would watch my mom doing meditation, and doing chakra work because her dad taught her that kind of thing. And I was like, well, that's what I was raised in. So I think that there's a lot of judgment out there, especially on TikTok, because a lot of it is just face value. We get 3 minutes of an interaction with somebody, and we're just making one blanket statement against what they're doing without understanding who they are, what they've been taught, where they come from, their personal history and their personal spiritual journey. And in my spiritual work, I try not to judge other people on their spiritual practices, because it's a very personal journey, folks. It's a very personal journey, so keep it as personal as you can.
Megan?
I do agree with a lot of everything that you said. And I was actually approached and asked if my practices were a closed practice. And no, it's not. If a whisperer or a Sheptula does not pass on their knowledge and their information, when they pass away, our spirits,
It's gone.
it's everything, all of our knowledge, but our spirits become restless, and that's never good, especially because we do work so strongly with ancestor magic. Like, everything's gone. So it's like the bloodline and the magic line is dead, gone. I do believe that there has to be a share of information. If you keep everything behind a closed door, I believe the information should be so shared, but I do agree that some practices do have steps in order to reach that. Mm-hmm. And in order to have that, you have to have the knowledge of somebody else teaching you. Mm-hmm. You can't just
jump into it blindly.
Yes.
And say, I know. It's like, no, you don't.
Yeah. Talking with a practitioner that follows that said practice is one thing, but just going off and saying that you're practicing it without the actual knowledge and stuff behind it, that's where the issue I think lies.
Yeah.
And I think to segue through that, I think it's important to note that anthropologically there is a profound difference between cultural exchange, cultural appropriation, and cultural misappropriation.
Yes.
Misappropriation predominantly is a method of colonialization in which we homogenize indigenous cultural practices, particularly in order for a primary stronger culture to subsume that culture into itself. And that is a very active, very real mechanism that is incredibly subversive, that we do need to make sure we interrogate in our own practices. Mm-hmm. And I think the conversation comes from, if you go to a practitioner of this and say, is this a closed practice? What you're really asking is this available to me through you? And they have the absolute right to say no. Mm-hmm. And when they say no, that means don't push them, because it's either they in their own practice, their own personal experience, feel that they are not the person to be a conduit of that information to, or that you are not ready for that information. There is a profound tradition, particularly in like traditional witchcraft, and in a lot of old European paganism too, that we refer to as mystery tradition. those mystery traditions were engineered with tiers in mind so that acolytes and students could develop the knowledge and ability to self-interrogate to understand the concepts that were actually being taught. So when we say, like, I think like the verbiage of appropriation and closed practice, especially in social media today, is often used as a rhetorical bludgeon to just silence a conversation, when the reality is that, like, you do need to have a conversation. There are practices that are intrinsically cultural, especially for cultures such as indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, Yoruban subcontinent religions that have a profound and very lengthy history of people coming in and taking those cultures, and not only taking them, but actively homogenizing them, washing them down in order for those conversions into their own culture to take place. And in moments of that, we have to just, as a practitioner, make sure that we do the appropriate research and work and ask people who are practitioners of that work. You know, we can't, it's not good research and it's not good academics to get all of your information strictly from online. And part of that is also gaining, like, part of learning the craft and learning our individual workings with a capital W is how I refer to it, has a lot to do with the academic side of things, but also the emic experiences of people who actually do practice and live those cultures. And if those people tell you you're not ready, or that this isn't for you in this moment, it's not your place to argue with them. And it's definitely not your place to go forward and say, well, this is the information I do have from open sources, so I'm going to continue practicing it my way. If you're practicing it only from a strictly rote perspective and not from an emic perspective, your own practice is ultimately a function of colonialization, and that's something that we have to interrogate in ourselves constantly. And it's work. It's hard work. I've been practicing for probably 16 years now, and I still have to stop myself and ask, like, is this appropriate in this moment? Is this appropriate to this place? Is this appropriate to my own history and my own culture? And that's something that we have to interrogate in ourselves, and it's our responsibility as not only pagans or neo-pagans, but also as practitioners of magical workings, for those of us who do have magical or psychic workings, is that we have a responsibility not only to ourselves and our community, but also to the ancestors and the people from whom we gain that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah?
So Carver said a lot of what I was going to say. So instead, I'm going to talk sort of more a little bit about personal experience. Because I gather from what people are saying that I'm maybe the only person on the panel who did grow up in a traditionally clothed cultural practice, right? So I'm Jewish. I understand people don't always understand this fact, but Judaism is a tribal culture that happens to have an ancillary religion, right? But it is in fact a tribal culture, and a tribal culture with thousands of years of history, and one that's been in diaspora for a long time, right? So I'm going to tell actually a little bit of Jewish history and talk about how that plays out in my life and how it plays out in this broader conversation about colonialism and cultural appropriation, right? Because the fact of the matter is that here in West Virginia, like in this particular conversation with these particular people, I think that our experience of colonialism is largely driven by white Western European Christendom. That culture was invented by appropriating my Jewish culture and turning it into a weapon of colonization, right? Rome conquered Judea, but very badly. Like, Rome had trouble. There was a ton, we went through a lot of Roman governors because we just murdered every Roman that showed up and tried to be in charge of us. Like, technically, Judea is a Roman colony, but that wasn't going well for them, right? And that is the historical background against which, like, sort of the story, the Gospels are written, right? Like, it's not always clear, but there is open civil war in the streets during that story. And this religion arises, right, that preaches a message of pacifism, right? And pacifism, in the face of struggle for liberation, is colonial oppression, right? So I really want to talk about like I appreciate, I 100% agree that I want to preface, I have never once been on TikTok. I cannot comment on.
Right.
I barely know what TikTok is. I assure you I'm like very old and out of touch, right? But I agree that I think the talk about cultural appropriation, particularly by people who maybe don't have a lot of experience living in like an intact tribal culture, is often wielded as a weapon. It is often done so by people with like no real stake in that game, right? I don't want to name names or cast aspersions, but let's say, for example, an imaginary 20-year-old white girl named Becky who's very aggressive about telling other people what they shouldn't do and not do with cultures that she can't even pronounce. That's also weird and gross. Don't do that. And I do want to address something Carter said, because I agreed with you 99%. But you can't say what is and isn't appropriate. I will say in Judaism, if you come to Judaism and ask to convert to Judaism and you are told no, y'all are expected to argue with that. Like, that is a very appropriate response, right? So I think, like, we can't always make claims about, like, you know, the correct way to interact with those cultures, because the nature of cultural differences, different cultures are different, and what your expected behavior is, you can't know that going in. You're going to try and be respectful, but what seems respectful in one culture is not respectful always in another, right? And so I think, like, it has to be about individual humans breathing the same air, having a conversation, and negotiating together, right? And all of us today, everyone today, lives in a world that is so deeply complex and also deeply fucked up. Like, deeply fucked up, that I think, honestly, as long as everybody is like, well, not everybody, right? Not everybody is operating from a position of like, oh, they're fucking up. Like, a lot of people are culturally appropriating quite intentionally and aggressively and offensively. And I guess what I'm saying is, y'all, we can tell the difference. Like, nobody thinks you're a Nazi because you, like, accidentally said something stupid about Judaism. But also, when you find out you're wrong, you don't need to double down.
Right.
But also, you don't need to be the police of other people, right? Like, so I guess my encouragement is, some practices are closed, and they don't need you to defend them.
Right.
You can let them handle that part too.
I think that like the like what you were saying, I think that determining what is appropriate and what isn't, I think like that should be left to the keepers of that tradition to like if someone who is a member of the Judaic like tribe tells you like, hey, please don't do that.
Right.
Believe them, please.
Believe them, but also appreciate that if you ask 2 other Jews, you're gonna get 5 other opinions. Like,
right.
like
that's the whole
nobody's culture is a
premise of Pagan.
monolith, and that's what it has to be. Like, I really think that almost everyone, when like your heart's in the right place,
Right.
like, you don't have to get obsessed about like the etiquette. Just like be respectful and nice, and appreciate that even though most of us here grew up in a culture that taught us that everything's up for grabs, that taught us, oh, all roads to spirit are leading to the same spirit. Well, that is a deeply colonialist message. Like, that kind of, like, it is. And, but like, I get it. Like, we all grew up with that message, and I appreciate, like, I feel so lucky and blessed to have come up on both sides of my family with 2 different intact, like, cultural transmissions. I appreciate that many people don't have that, and that sucks. So I will say my primary spiritual goal is the formation of like a new American spirituality, right? That we're all in this together, we're all just trying to figure it out. Let's figure it out. You know what I mean? Together. And you don't have to appropriate things from other people's cultures. And I'm going to say one other.
Go for it.
I'm supposed to be courting controversy. That is like the goal
Yes,
here, right?
that's
Okay,
the whole thing.
Yeah. I just
All
want to be
these
clear,
different
like,
views
like
in
I'm maybe hot taken because I
Okay.
was told the hot take, but I love you guys all. I want to throw out there that like having ancestry and being a part of a culture are almost unrelated. Like having ancestry from Greece doesn't make you Greek. What makes you Greek, I will say, particularly on behalf of me and my Greek people, is speaking Greek, but also like our food and our culture and knowing how to navigate that, right? And most of us, colonialism functions. There's a lot of political mechanisms, but on a spiritual level, colonialism is made possible by severing the links of people to their ancestors, to their land, and to their language. And I encourage you to take those things back, right?
That's the first thing I teach, decolonizing the craft.
That is where it is. If you live in a place, the land that is sacred to you has to be the land where you live. And that's hard because we live on some land with some deeply fucked up, stolen over and over and still being stolen and probably stealing already. And also the whole notion that land can be stolen as if a human being can own a piece of land is itself already a deeply fucked up concept, right? But Riesta, the only land you can have a spiritual relationship with in a meaningful way. That's too strong, I don't want to say that. The best land, the most important land to have a spiritual relationship with is the land where you are, right? Where you live and where you breathe, where your piss turns into the rain. That's your land, right? And your ancestors, which is your ancestors of blood and your family. We say in my circle that everybody's roots grow in shit. We all got some problematic ancestors, right? And for no one in any culture anywhere on earth is your ancestry of blood and your family identical. And ancestors is all of it in complex ways, right? And your language, right? And what all of us here today share is the English language. We're gonna have to make our home in it, but I strongly encourage you, right? So like you were saying, materials are in Polish, so it took you a long time to learn. I'm gonna assume that that's because you started learning Polish.
Yes,
yes, right.
Yes.
So that's what I'm saying. Like at the end of the day, the way you show meaningful respect for a culture, the way you participate in a culture you didn't grow up in, is learn the language. And I know like people don't want to hear that because it's hard, right? I had to teach myself Greek. I didn't grow up speaking Greek. I had to teach myself Hebrew and Yiddish. Like they're hard, right? And you don't gotta do it well. Like you don't gotta. The difference between me talk pretty or even like yes, thank you, good. I don't know where that. That was just me trying to like be respectful in a language I don't speak. It was a weird choice that I made. Sorry.
And like that's science. Like more languages you speak, when you learn a new language, it actually physically changes your brain structure in order to think in different ways. Yeah. So learn all the languages.
I agree. I'm gonna throw this out there to young people in particular. Do it now. Yeah. It is so much harder learning languages now than it was when I was 25. Yeah. So do it now because it gets harder more than anything else in my life as I've gotten older.
Let that Duolingo owl abuse you.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So round two of this. Since we're all spiritual leaders and we all have personal pet peeves, what is your number one spiritual pet peeve?
Can I go first?
Yeah, go for
It's
it.
that, all roads to spirit, lead to the divine spirit. And yeah, your God is definitely the same as my God. I assure you that it is not. I assure you my spiritual path is maybe not going the same place as yours. Side note, I'm gonna say a second one that sounds like a different thing. They're the same thing. It's when people are like, oh, there's no devil in the craft. Because I don't know what craft they're talking about, maybe knitting. My craft is all up full of devils.
I'm still formulating which one.
like which one you want to pick? I know I'm like sitting. I'm like, I have so many. Like, which one do I want to really choose?
So can we skip me for a second?
Yeah.
One of the things that really kind of irks me a lot, especially because of the type of practice that I have, is like that sickly, awful, like weird always have to be positive, because there has to be a balance. We have to work with our demons as well as the gods and goddesses, because there has to be a balance between the two. Not that demons and other world beings are any less than that. You have to understand where those energies are coming from. Sticking to just straight positivity makes you such like a shell of a person. There's no substance underneath of it, because you're not getting the full aspect and the full understanding of anything if you're ignoring a whole section of other things. Like, it's all left behind. You have to at least understand it. I'm not asking you to physically work with it all day long, but there has to be at least an understanding. It can be scary, yeah. Some of that energy is a lot. So it's like taking like Alada or working with Vesna, and then but also working with Velez and Baba Yaga. We have to have the balance between what people consider positive and negative, because in an actual practice, there's kind of no positive and negative. It's because some people need what some consider negative, and some don't need that. But there has to be that understanding. Just the constant positivity. Just
And what's a positive for one person could be an absolute negative for another person.
love and light.
You know, it's where the energy's going in that moment. You know, eventually it might come right back around to you, boomerang style. But
Good vibes only. Thanks.
like I was just thinking, like I will light a candle for you as quickly as I will put your name in a jar. like it just depends on the day and what you've said to me in that moment. You know, not always love and light. I'm like, I will send as much positivity your way, but please don't make me put you in the freezer. But that's just me. My biggest pet peeve is psychic testing. That really makes me want to pull my teeth out. When I tell people I'm a psychic and they're like, oh, what am I thinking right now?
No, that's mentalism, not psychic.
I'm like, shut up. You know, they're like, what color is my underwear?
Ew.
But I've had people ask me that stuff before. You know, they'll ask me the most asinine questions that have absolutely no spiritual bearing at all. You know what I mean? Like just stupid stuff. Or they'll just be like, what was my grandma's name? Oh my God. I'm like, I don't know. Did you forget? Because it doesn't really work that way. Or they'll come onto like a psychic chat or one of the networks that I'm on, and they're like, I want to talk to my grandma.
Did you make an appointment?
Fucking A. I'm like, I want to talk to my grandpa too, but he has not been responding to me for at least 2.5 weeks. So, you know, get in line, folks. It doesn't really work that way. If Spirit's got something to say to you, they will tell you, or they'll tell me, and then I'll tell you. But it doesn't work that way. I can't just text them and hope that they're going to respond immediately, because they got other stuff to do on the other side. And sometimes they don't want to talk to you, to be honest, because you've been doing things that you should not be doing, and they know that you know. And sometimes I have said that to some clients. I'm like, you know exactly why this stuff is coming out on your cards. So don't play dumb with me, because I know that you know. But yeah, psychic testing and like the grilling and it's the nitpicking questions that really irks me. I was like, I'm not a magician. I'm not a toy. You don't turn me on and press a few buttons and get the response that you want. Because 9 times out of 10, you're going to hear something from me that you probably didn't want to hear, but you damn well needed to hear it. And sometimes that's really hard for me to say to people, because I can see the looks on your faces and you're like, damn. And I'm like, oh, sorry. Hope that made sense for you. And usually it does. Usually it does. And if it doesn't, a week later I get a text message like, remember that thing that you said? It just happened. Sorry.
My favorite one is, that's not what the book says. The book says you have to call from the east. Why are you calling from the west? See, book, Llewellyn does it.
Hey House says. Hey House
Go
says.
out to the woods and play.
I once said someone told me that my understanding of the Kabbalah of SL Mastros, P.S. that's me, was totally wrong. And then that SL Mastros was definitely not a woman. But it was cool because it was an OTO meeting and everybody there but that dude knew who I was.
That's awesome. You just sit there and go, neat.
He's like, for a long time, and I don't know, we never
Finally
saw
run
him
out of
again.
gas.
Eventually, I couldn't give a straight face anymore.
Oh.
We just lost it. Humiliated him.
I would have done just walked up and be like, hi.
Eventually, we let him go for a long time.
All right, this
While
is my
videoing
last
the response.
one, and then we're gonna throw it to you guys. I wish I would have known before picking up sword, staff, broom, blank.
Don't put me. I wish I knew I was psychic.
Okay.
I wish I understood who I was before I understood who I was.
Okay.
Because I spent 30 plus years in my head going, what the fuck is wrong with me? Like, am I really that weird? Do I really just say things that are that unsettling to people? Like, what, you know? It's a little odd to have family members and strangers in your home that look at you sideways because you said something that you shouldn't maybe have known about. And as there weren't very many spiritually practicing people in my family, it really was kind of swept under the rug. And so 30 years of me thinking I'm just a little bit odd. No, you're just psychic. And now it all makes sense. But yeah, I wish I had known that that's who I was before I knew that's who I was. I know that's, you know, everybody kind of does, but that's me.
Megan.
Very similar to that. In my practice, everything is done word of mouth from usually grandmother to daughter or granddaughter. So I learned from my grandmother, but I didn't know at the time that that's what she was specifically teaching me. A lot of the teachings happened while we were cooking. My first lesson was sitting on our counter making plutzki, and I'm just sitting there with the batter and the whisk. And she was telling me stories, and that's how a lot of stuff is passed down, is through those stories. And we're the closest when we're cooking because the kitchens ain't real big, and so everything gets passed with the food. And as I've started learning the language, trying to remember what my grandmother said in Polish, combining the lessons with everything else, and then along with some literary like lessons through the Polish books, I'm starting to piece back together what she was actually teaching me. So I wish I could have gone back and had a broader understanding of that, of what she was teaching, because I did lose her at a younger age. So trying to mush all those years that we had together into and forming that practice.
I the exact same way, because that's exactly how a lot of my like Appalachian working was transmitted to me. And it was never referred, most true historical Appalachian practitioners outside of modern like neo-pagan settings would never refer to themselves actually as a witch. They would never refer to themselves as that. But I just because I had the privilege of knowing my great-grandmother, and I remember growing up, she would teach me a lot of stuff just by doing it, which is how a lot of these kind of workings with a capital W are transmitted. And I just wish that if I could go back in time with what I know now, I would pay attention so much more, because a lot of it was just like, she's just old and crazy and smells like cats. And like, that's like how I thought when I was younger, and I didn't really know the true importance of it. And the importance of it wasn't reinforced because unfortunately, like my mamaw was, on that side of the family, was a fundamentalist Baptist, born again, so rejected everything that my great-grandmother tried to teach her. And so generationally, the line was somewhat broken. And the reinforcement of my mamaw's generation and my mother's and my father's generation did not reinforce in me the importance of what my great-grandmother was transmitting to me. And I wish that I had had the awareness to know how important that information was and how integral that would be in the coming years, because I would stop practicing until I was, I wouldn't think about it after she died until I was about 18, when I was like starting to get into like Wicca and neo-paganism and like magic working that way. And then I was like, my mama had a pair of magic spoons.
Like this seems a lot. This seems very familiar. A lot of this is bringing back memories.
She had spoons for every day of the week. Granted, she also potentially killed 3 of her husbands, but
Counting down the mining accidents, don't you know how to say that right?
the first one was actually hit by a horse.
Okay.
He died of a myocardial infarction,
Uh-huh.
and she grew belladonna in her backyard. It was definitely a horse. They didn't even own a horse.
You know, according to the coroner, my father's father died from hypnosis of a black snake.
Love it.
My
Yeah.
grandmother grew castor plants in the back of her property. I'm like, we all had poisonous bitches in our history, like all of them.
You had to.
I just wish that
About
I was
balance.
honored.
It's all about balance.
Well, I mean, like, I'm sort of everybody's sort of, I guess, coming around to the same things. And I think that is that, like, as we get older, I think the things we wish we'd done differently, like, in regards to the craft, aren't actually in regards to the craft at all. Like, we all wish that when we were young, we knew ourselves better, craft or no, right? And we all wish that, like, we'd made more time for our elders when we were young. And I guess I feel like the truth is, I don't know, I feel like I learned everything I could every minute that I could. What do I wish I'd known? I wish I'd known everything then. I still don't, and I still wish I did. But I think truthfully, I've been very happy with the way my path has unfolded. My regrets are all, regular. I'm getting older. Wish I'd made time for my grandparents. Normal. Everybody, like, good on you. You're so young. You figured it out.
I am not done.
Mine is like, I
maybe
wish
you're
I paid that
older.
bill on time.
Well, I wish I knew I needed an extra house for all the stuff you collect.
So many tchotchkes.
Just a storage unit just for the stuff.
Just a house for altars. The altar's in there. We've got work to do. I'm going to the altar house.
I think I've looked at my house occasionally and gone, I'm pretty sure I have an altar in every single room.
Yes.
Unintentionally created. It's just unintentionally created, but I keep noticing, I'm like, every place in my house there's a candle on like every corner. Like and I didn't do that on purpose, but they're all there.
All right. Anyone else got any questions for the panel?
Yep.
Yeah.
For Carver, have you noticed, I work with runes and everything, have you noticed more or less of a negative connotation from outsiders when, I work with runes? Don't you know that's with white supremacists? Like where it's getting that accidentally cross-reference between, and it's like, no, here, sit down, we need to talk.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah, so are you asking just in general or
just in
specifically
general, or
like
if you
working
had
with the
specific
rune
times?
astrology?
Yeah.
So like rune crafting in and of itself, the sad truth is that we don't actually know for a fact that we have those historically, that Norse people were practicing those interpretations of those specific runes. And it even says, like in the opening lines of the Havamal, that Odin kept runes to himself. He didn't give all the runes to mankind because he wants to be the All-Father.
Odin.
I was like, it's
So he
Odin.
kept some to himself. So we don't even have a full grasp of all
He doesn't need a
of
reason he's
the
Odin.
spiritual conceptualizations of the runes as a
'cause I
form
want
of
to.
horoscopes or like
Okay.
reading the future or present or past. I think what you're like, not to generalize it, but like the conversation of like white supremacy in Norse spirituality is a whole thing. And it's an incredibly unfortunate thing. I think
it brings up a good point, though.
it does bring up a point. My theory, and it's so unfortunate that she couldn't make it here. My friend Donna Donovan, who works predominantly in the prison system, particularly in Norse prison systems. Me and her have had these conversations back and forth as to like, as an anthropologist, I'm interested in knowing what is generating that sort of white supremacy and why it so easily latches onto Norse spirituality. It's because it has a lot to do with the Thule Society and the history of Nazism. We're not going to get into that because that's triggering and it's a whole thing. But I think what I talk about a lot in decolonizing the craft, particularly decolonizing Norse spirituality, has a lot to do with how you enter into the spirituality itself. I think the remedy for tribalism, which leads itself, it's a pipeline, right? So tribalism leads into nationalism, which leads into discrimination and racist practice. I think that if you enter into, and I can only speak of Norse spirituality, but I would argue that it's probably true of any kind of Reconstructionist pagan society. If you enter into it carrying your Western preconceptions that promote individualism over collectivism, if we understand those terms, so it's like you are out for yourself and your spiritual journey is yours and yours alone. That's good, and that's true, that your spiritual journey is yours, but your spiritual, the experiences that you gain from your spiritual journey also belong to the collective and your community. And I think that I always say, like, you should, if you're in reconstructing Norse spirituality, I always say you should be an animist first and then a Norse spiritualist second. You should always root your religious practice around the spiritual concept that we are interconnected. Because if we're all interconnected, if you truly believe we're all interconnected, it doesn't matter what gods or runes or horospecs or path or craft that you choose, you are no longer susceptible to tribalism and nationalism and discrimination, because at the end of the day, your true spiritual center is in interconnection rather than separation. And I think in conversations with Donna, who works in the prison system, we both have come to the conclusion that it's because, if you look at the actual culture of prison, in order to survive in prison, you have to be individualist. You have to worry about number one, and that's just the unfortunate state of the U.S. prison system, because it's, well, basically slavery. But and it promotes that sort of individual, tribal kind of out for yourself mentality, and then they're being introduced to these other pagan religions, because it's not just like the Aryan Brotherhood or the folk assemblies that root in prison that are just nationalists using spirituality as their terminology. I think that in order to address those kinds of notions of white nationalism and Norse spirituality, we first have to always engage with those practices from a place of animistic connection. So when you engage with the runes, it's not just about yourself, it's also about communicating with the world around you and seeing it as such. And it's not you using a tool. I always say horospecs and like a neuromancy, which is one thing that dream interpretation and stuff is one thing that I work. It's not a hammer for you to go around and nail things with. It's a limb. It's an organic sense, and that's how I always view my own craft. Is that my craft is not my craft is not the athame or the broom or the runes. My craft is myself. The runes are just a framework in which to interact with the world on a different level, and I think going into any kind of craft or any kind of horospecs or practice, regardless of its cultural setting, with a sense of interconnection is the answer to I guess curing the pipeline of spirituality to white nationalism. And you can't dictate what other people do. It's going to be a function regardless, as long as the U.S. prison system is built the way that it is. It will always be a pipeline, and we see that also in not only Norse spirituality, but we see that in a lot of what I refer to as antagonistic fundamentalist spiritualities in Abrahamic religions. You saw it in British colonial India, in the establishment of the Thuggee cults, where they took the worship of Kali and made it an incredibly granted it was antagonistic towards colonialism, which I'm perfectly fine with, but it was still an antagonistic and aggressive stance of spirituality.
Kali is pretty aggressive, though. Sorry.
Right, but it was militarized.
I know, I understand that.
We're seeing it not only in Norse paganism, but we're seeing it in Wicca, in Wicca writings, in other it's bleeding more like a cancer.
Yeah.
I will say, from my point of view, as sort of an outsider Norse practice, it seems to me it's actually getting better. 30 years ago, as soon as a person said the word Norse, I was like, that's going to be a fucking Nazi.
And they were.
But so I feel from the outside, I see you guys in that community really taking a hard stance and being vocal. So I think it's getting better.
And as my stance on it is it has to be met with the same volume that it is being perpetrated in our communities. And like in any instance, not just Norse spirituality, but any pagan community in which these kind of mentalities and pipelines start forming, it has to be met by that community.
Pacifism in the face of war for liberation is colonial collaboration.
Yeah, and it does. It if you see something, say something is basically like my thing. And a lot of times, unfortunately, particularly in Norse spirituality, that may actually put us in a place of unsafety. Especially like for me, for instance, I always have to balance like, is this something that I can say in this setting, or is this something that's going to get me queer bashed? Because like, and that's a real balance, but that's also part of being a living religion, is that you have to take on the responsibility of addressing issues that arise within your community itself. And we can be solitary practitioners all we want in our own practice, but at the end of the day, paganism historically was a collectivist practice. There was no such thing as solitary paganism before Christianity. Solitaryism is rooted in the same practices that suppress us, and it's a reaction to suppression and aggression against practitioners of those beliefs, and it's the drive to become solitary. And if we're the first step in fighting those kind of suppressive ideas is to join community and embrace community.
Okay.
Like this is an act of sedition against nationalism, just us gathering here. So.
Okay, so we're out of time. They put me on a time crunch this year, which is all right. I know, I really could use 3 for this. But anyhow, where can they find you? Where are you at next? What's your next thing? Let's wrap it up.
You can find me at www.thependulumspath.com. If you type in the Pendulum's Path in Google, you'll find me everywhere. All the socials, every network. I'm there. I'm on Bitwine, Purple Ocean, Tari. I'm on a whole bunch of psychic networks as well. And I do live streams and free readings and stuff like that as well. So.
And her next event is at 3 p.m. for the Psych Off.
Yes.
Which is like a weird lead-in from like, I hate psychic.
And now we're going to go battle being psychic.
No,
That's fine.
Being psychic, we're battling psychic view, which is different.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Psychic perspectives versus like challenging our visions.
Yeah.
You can find me at she'sthewhisperer.com. I also have a Facebook page, and then I have a teaching group that I've just started. It's called the Brolno, which is circle in Polish.
Right now, you can really only find me on Facebook. I'm under Carver Genesis Casey. I'm kind of working on branding myself a little bit more at the bequest of other people. Most of the workshops that I teach around the Clarksburg, Morgantown area are pretty like word of mouthy. But I teach workshops on Appalachian folk practice, anything from Appalachian folk practice to also homesteading stuff, because canning is just as much magic as
Seriously, facts.
You know, putting someone's name and wrapping it with a cow tongue and putting it in the freezer.
And you can do both at the same time. You can do it at the can your green beans and hex simultaneously in the same pot.
It's just as much magic to me as that. So I teach like a lot of homesteading stuff. You can find me on Facebook.
Well, I'm already using these quotes for something else. Might as well toss some extra energy in that pot.
Google my name, you will find me. My next appearance is in approximately 2 minutes over there. I have handouts with all my stuff in it. Again, if you Google my name in quotes anywhere, you will find me. But also, if you want to remember it, witch, WITCH, lessons.com. I teach lessons on witchcraft. So, in particular, I'm just going to plug for one second. Right now, my introductory class just opened, and also Sorcery of Solomonic Seals. All that info on my website, but also on the back of the handout, because I had a...
Awesome.
So stay for the class.
Yeah, stay for class.
All right, guys.
And everything we talked about, really, about like culture and communion with your ancestors and community, leads directly into what we're gonna do. Like I'm gonna help you form those. I'm gonna help you take that back.
And of course, I'm Ace and Knight. You can find me everywhere. Just type in Ace and Knight. I normally turn up whether you want me there or not. 8 point. All right, guys. Sarah will have her class, and then we'll have the psychic off, and then after that.
And then it's Megan, and then it's Harbor. So
Yep.
just stay for all the classes. It's going to be great.
Yep. And
Thank
Miss
you all
Donovan
so much.
here, thank you for taking Shop of the Year this year, my lady.
Traffic, I apologize. Megan forgot to mention that you can also find her at Earth Magic during the week, and she'll be doing a class on spellbook making upcoming.
Yep.
So.